The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Alrighty, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today. This is part one of a 12-part webinar series on the 90-day business sprint. It's hosted by Chris Snyder, the award-winning thought leader and CEO and president of the Exit Planning Institute. My name is Drew English. I am the program coordinator here at EPI. Just a quick note before I hand it over to Chris for the webinar today. All the webinars will be recorded and sent out for your review afterwards. So if you want to keep an eye out to your email from me, you will get a recording to this email. So I'll turn it over to Chris here, and we'll get going.
Great, thanks, Drew. And good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, I guess, depending on where you are in the country. I'm glad you could join us today, and this is our first webinar of a 12-part series where we'll be covering the 11 actions to rapidly grow value and unlock wealth. Over the next 12 months, what we'll do is we'll cover each of the 11 actions. The purpose of the series is to provide you some of my personal insights on each action in my book, Walking to Destiny. Today, I'll give you an overview of the 11 actions and what I've called the perfect exit. And then succeeding months, we'll cover each of the 11 actions as we go through them in the book. Before I kind of get started on that, just want to give you an update on some of the things that are happening in the next 90 days, and I'm hopeful if you happen to be in one of these cities where I will be visiting, I'm hoping I get a chance to maybe meet you at one of these upcoming visits. On the 31st, I believe, well, actually, I think it's on the 1st and the 2nd of February, we're going to be out at the AMA conference in Las Vegas. I was very fortunate to be nominated and a finalist this year again for Thought Leader of the Year. Hopefully the second time is the charm. We don't have to go 3 times for that. We're very much looking to connect up with our friends at the AMA conference, and I'm sure there's many SEPAs that are going to be out there as well. We also have our next SEPA program, Certified Exit Planning Advisor program, is in Atlanta. It's going to be the second week of February, and it's our first program in Atlanta. So we're very excited to be down there, and we're going to be hosting the program with the assistance of the Georgia State University in downtown Atlanta. It's going to be pretty exciting because we arrive the day of the Super Bowl, and of course the Falcons are in the Super Bowl, and so it should be a pretty good time in Atlanta, especially if the Falcons win the Super Bowl that day. We also have 3 owners forums coming up. There will be the next one is in Twin Cities area in Minneapolis. That is coming together very nice. We will also be doing one in Washington, D.C., what we call our Capital Region chapter. And we also have one scheduled for Phoenix, Arizona as well. Now these forums, if you happen to be in one of these cities and you're a business owner, I highly recommend you attend these. It's a great investment of your time. You'll have the opportunity to come in for a full day, get yourself out of the office, the focus will be on the 5 stages of value maturity, which we'll cover later in the year, but you can also read about that in my book, and we'll have several panels and a lot of interaction among your peers. When we do these forums, we're not going to overwhelm you with advisors. Typically the owner-advisor ratio is about 90% business owners. So you're not going to have a bunch of advisors there that are going to try to be selling you stuff. This is intended to provide owners education on the things they can do to improve the value of their business and position themselves for a solid exit. And then finally, we will be releasing shortly 2 additional state of owner readiness surveys. For those of you, some of you may recall that we've done this before. For those of you that are new, in 2013, EPI underwrote the first national state of owner readiness survey. We went out and surveyed business owners to determine their state of readiness And what we were really trying to do was figure out why we have such poor transition success rates across the country. And so we went to the source of the business owners and basically asked them a set of questions to kind of give us some insight as to what their present state of mind is and what we could do to start building programs to help them be more successful with their growth of their business and the ultimate transition of their business so that they can monetize that hard-earned wealth that we all, as owners, know how hard we work for that. What we've started to do is regional surveys now. We are going to be completing one for the San Diego, greater San Diego area in Southern California. And we'll be releasing one for the Nashville, Tennessee area as well. With San Diego, we worked with BNY Mellon, who sponsored the survey and gave us a lot of help and guidance, and also with Cal State University, the San Marcos campus. And then in Nashville, Tennessee, we worked with Vanderbilt University, the students from the graduate school there, to help us analyze the data and put together the reports. And also that report was also sponsored with the help of our chapter leader in Nashville, Tennessee, and also BNY Mellon. So this is interesting information. I will tell you that it's interesting that the results in San Diego matched pretty closely what we saw on the national scale. But one of the things that we'll be revealing with the Tennessee report is that it appears that the owners in the Tennessee area are somewhat more prepared based on the statistics than what we saw in San Diego. And we think we found some correlations as to why. And all of that will be explained in the report. So look for those reports, or if you have a local BNY contact them, and I'm sure they'll be happy to share the report. You'll also find that report out on the Exit Planning Institute's website once they're released, I think in about a week or so here. During the course of the year, we'll be doing, I think we have about 7 or 8 more of these. We're underway right now in Minneapolis. Those results will be released at the Owners Forum in Minneapolis. And we have several others that will be scheduled during the course of the year. So the research that's being done by the Exit Planning Institute will continue, and we continue to look for guidance from business owners as to what we can be doing to help them grow the value of their business and exit successfully when that day comes. Before I jump into the material, I do want to thank all of you that have purchased my book, Walking to Destiny, especially those of you that have purchased and distributed the book to friends and colleagues, and especially to those of you that have even gone the extra mile and provided a review for us out on Amazon. The book sales have gone great. We're very happy with that, and the reviews have been very, very solid, which is I can maybe even say it's a relief. You know, you don't know when you write a book. This is my first book, as to how well it's going to be received. You kind of put your ideas out there, and you're hoping that they will be well received. And based on the reviews, I'm pretty pleased with the impact that the book is having in the market. If you haven't purchased the book, I'd highly recommend, obviously, that you do that and read through the book as we go through the 11 actions during the course of the rest of the year. Now, I entered the field of exit planning in 2009 after attending EPI's Certified Exit Planning Advisor Credentialing Program in the fall of 2008. First piece of advice I'll give the business owners is that what you should look for if you're getting into this space and you want some help, look for somebody that has the CEPA credential. You can rest assured that if they have that credential, they have gone through thorough training, they have passed a proctored exam, they have been required to maintain continuous education, and they have also agreed to maintain a certain code of ethics that we've defined that go along with the CEPA credential. These are people that may be a financial planner, they may be an accountant, they may be an attorney, they may be a banker. It's a whole series of different advisors that go through the program, and really what we teach them is we give them a broad overview of what it takes to really exit successfully. It's very interactive, and these professionals then go back into their respective markets with a collaborative mindset of working with other business advisors and really understanding the value acceleration methodology. After I got certified in 2008, 2 years previous to that, I had actually formed my own company and created a model called BIGS, which stood for, and stands for, really, buy, improve, grow, and sell. Now, when I launched the BIGS model, BIGS was really intended for me. Aspire Management, which was the company I created at the time, was intended to be a holding company, which is why I called it Aspire Management. I didn't call it Aspire Consulting, I didn't call it Aspire Services. It was intended to be a holding company. And mainly because I had decided at that time that I really wanted to be a business owner, and I had set aside a portion of my wealth to purchase and build a portfolio of businesses which would adopt the BIGS model. In other words, my original intention was that I wanted to buy, improve, grow, and sell my own businesses. But I'm sure many of you are on the call here are business owners, and a majority of you probably started your business. So for those of you that have gone through that process, you know that how difficult it is to start a business from scratch, and you also know how tight cash flow can get when you're first launching. I was fortunate enough to already have a good reputation for being a guy that could come in and help grow businesses, and when my owner friends heard that I was off on my own, several of them called and asked me if I'd come in and help them. And I thought, I'm thinking, hey, you know, this would be a great way to bring in some cash while I searched for a business to buy. Little did I know that within 6 months I was fully booked, and I sat back one night and said, I've got a business. And that was really the beginning of Aspire Management, my career in working with business owners. Aspire's model was always one that led with building value first, which often then led to the selling of the owner's business at a premium. But one of the things I noted was that in some cases, just as we were about to push the ball over the goal line through the sale of the business, my owner friends would start, I guess the best way I could say is they start acting squirrely, is the way I used to characterize it. I couldn't understand it, and thinking, God, we've been driving the ball down the field. You know, we're in the red zone. We're ready to punch it over, and now you want to back out. Like, why? Most of the time, I didn't get good answers. I got very irrational answers, and I realized through this process that I was missing something. There was something that was preventing these owners from actually signing the agreement and moving on from their businesses. And after thinking about it, I realized that I had only really been focusing on creating value, and I was not focused on the emotional, or the psychological, or the personal feelings, you know, about the sale. And I think that was probably because at that time I'd really only been a business owner for a couple of years, and you know, prior to that I had had a long career in corporate, and I had a real, which I'll talk about here in a second, a real great experience with Andy Rayburn at Flexloy. That was the first privately held middle market business I was with, and even though I learned a lot from those owners, you know, there's nothing like, you know, when you're the guy that signs the front of the check, right? And that brings a whole different kind of perspective when you're risking your own assets, your own family assets, and you know that if you don't make a sale today, you know, you don't eat. So I think that I didn't really, even though I had launched a consulting practice, I never really I wasn't at that point in the owner's mindset. And so that's when I came across an email from the Exit Planning Institute, and I came across EPI's philosophy, which still stands today, and that is, you know, to have a successful exit, you need to address not just maximizing the value of the business, that's a big important piece of it, but you also need to spend time on the owner's personal and financial goals and objectives and integrate those in with the business plans of the owners. And for most of us, again, as owners, you know, we get so focused on our business, and it consumes so much of our time and our emotional capacity, frankly, that we tend to neglect things that are important to us personally, and it's just out of necessity. You don't have a lot of personal time. And so what happens is, you know, you kind of go along with your life as you're growing your business, and you're consumed by it, and your identity is tied to it, and then all of a sudden you're faced with the idea that that business is going away, and you're hit with you know, with a 2x4 that, you know, what am I going to do? And am I financially secure enough to walk away from the income that I've been getting from the business? And this is why a lot of transitions fail. It's also a big reason why in that Price Waterhouse study that I've quoted, 75% of owners within a year after exiting their business profoundly regretted it. And it's usually not for financial reasons. It's usually because they're just not as busy as they have been in the past. They don't feel as fulfilled, and they're not sure what to do with their time. A lot of us put a lot of time into our businesses, and unless we've planned for what we're going to do next, it's a pretty big void. And I'm sure you know some owners that have been through this. I know several of them, good friends. You know, some are in their 60s or 70s. I've got some in their 40s. And if they haven't really planned for what they're going to do next, they kind of wander around for a couple of years trying to figure it out. Fortunately, most of them do figure it out and find something else to go do. Now, the idea of this, understanding these non-business issues, were really killing my deals. Not all of them, but some of them. And I really underestimated the impact of this, and frankly, EPI kind of put me on the right track. EPI's philosophy is to address what we call the three legs of the stool. And we're going to cover that, I think, in a couple of months. I think maybe in March we're going to cover the three legs. And that's on point. One of the, and those three legs are, you know, to make sure that you're maximizing value. Second, to make sure you have prepared personally and financially for a life, for income outside the business. And then third, to make sure you have planned for your third act. And Peter Chrisman came up with this concept of the three legs, and basically what he's saying is, look, if one of those legs is not equally addressed, the stool's going to be wobbly, and if one of those legs of a three-legged stool are missing, that stool will not stand. All three legs have to be equally addressed, and that really, I felt, was a great concept to build on. One of the weaknesses I saw in the exit planning profession at that time is that it was perceived as just that. It was perceived as plans, exit planning, right? And a lot of exit planners were going out and trying to sell to business owners, I'll come in and I'll help you set up a plan to exit your business. The problem with that is that even though we know planning is important, and written planning is very important, plans don't create positive outcomes unless they get implemented. And owners didn't want plans. What they wanted was action, and they wanted results, and they wanted them fast. And even though in concept they would agree with the idea, in fact, we see this in our surveys. I think in the San Diego survey, 84% of the owners said that they agreed with the statement that having an exit plan was important to the future of their business and the future of their personal life. I think in Tennessee, I think that number was up around 98%, something like that. It was around at least the mid-90s. So owners understand that it's important to have a plan, but they need to have results along the way that will eventually get them to that state of mind. And some owners enter these plans without really knowing when they want to exit, or really without the desire to exit at that point in time. So I think this issue of having these plans that don't get implemented was really addressed very well in a book called Execution. I don't know if some of you may have read it. For those of you that haven't, I'd suggest you look it up. It was written by Larry Bossidy and Ron Sharon. And what they wrote in the book is that most strategies are not wrong. The problem is that they sit on a shelf and they never really materialize in creating the positive changes that they were intended to create, mainly because the creator didn't give enough consideration to what it would take to actually implement the strategy. In other words, the actions needed for the vision to become reality. The second problem that I saw in the industry is that the changes that were needed to create the positive outcomes were not being integrated into the way the owners were running their businesses every day. It was always viewed kind of as a project that, if I have time, we'll get to. And the third problem that I saw in the industry at that time was that often the changes required to the business processes and the infrastructure to achieve the plan's vision overwhelmed the organizations who were most often already busy enough. I'm sure if you went out and talked to your people, they're going to tell you they're busy enough. They don't need another project. They don't need another thing to do. And most often, this overwhelming occurrence was the result of trying to take on too much change too fast, and I felt a more incremental, continuous improvement approach would be more sustainable over the long term. So, as such, these plans, as I said, were viewed as projects versus the way we do business, and all too often these strategies ended up being aborted and put back on the shelf when the going got tough or the organization got overwhelmed. And you may have experienced this yourself, right? I mean, you see a lot of strategies when you visit companies and they're on the shelf, and a bit of a frustration on the owner's part because the ideas were there. They were good ideas. It's not that the ideas were wrong. They just had trouble getting them implemented. And most of it was, like I said, tied to the organization being overwhelmed by it, trying to do too much too fast. And so, the typical reaction from an owner when you went out to see them and said, look, I want to come in and help you do an exit plan. They're like, exit planning? I don't have time for that. So we saw that a lot of owners were rejecting the idea of doing exit planning, which is why, in our surveys, we saw very few of them had written plans. And very few of them viewed exit planning as nothing more than what it really is good business strategy. We're going to get into that next month. And so industry didn't have a lot of success. And we wanted to, or I felt like we needed to do something about it. A different way of thinking, a new paradigm had to be created. And that's really what I really get into in my book is we need a new paradigm on exit planning. What is it really? And how do we make it part of what we do every day and not this important but not urgent project we never really have time to get to. So one of my favorite authors is Wallace D. Wattles. You see it on the screen here. He wrote a book called The Science of Getting Rich. Another book I would suggest you read. And I will forewarn you, it's not a thick book. Some of you may have already read it, I would imagine. But it's a book you got to read about 4 or 5 times before you really get it. And what he really he talks about in the book is it's not so much a book about getting rich. It's really more a book about having your personal values and committing to a personal vision. In other words, he talks about creating a mental image of what you really want to create in fine detail, and then having the purpose to achieve it, basically making up your mind that you will achieve this, and then implementing actions that match your values. At the end of the day, it's all about action, and one of his quotes is, by thought the thing you want is brought to you, but by only through action will you receive it. And so at the end of the day, what I felt we needed really here was we needed a methodology that was more action-oriented, that could be integrated into what I'm doing in my business every day, and not only generating benefits for my future, but generating benefits for me today, right away. And I felt with a methodology like that, we were going to, find more owners receptive to the idea of integrating exit planning into the way they run their business. And this led me then to create the methodology, which the book is about, called Value Acceleration. The Value Acceleration methodology, or what I like to have you think of it as, is a management system. This is the methodology that the book is really based on, and this is how we teach CEPA, Certified Exit Planning Advisor Program, today. And this is what I've been using with my clients and in my own businesses now for several years. One thing I will tell you about, I'm not trying to pitch EPI here, but one thing I think it's important for you to know is that when we bring an idea to the table, this idea has usually been, put in the oven and it's been baking in the oven for, a year and a half or 2 years. So I use this methodology with my clients and my business for a number of years before I introduced it to the members of EPI. And so I knew it. It was proven. I knew it worked. And that's the way a lot of our programs, these owner forums, for example, that we're bringing to the table, this was something, the first forum we implemented, I think 2 years ago here in Northeast Ohio, and Mark Kravitz in New York City, our chapter president there, really helped us roll it out. Jim Mayer in St. Louis has done an owners forum. Steve Beatty in Las Vegas has done an owners forum. So these forums have been crafted, tested, and prototyped for at least a couple of years. And so the CEPAs that are rolling out these, and the sponsors that are rolling out these forums for you in these various cities this year, understand that these programs work. Otherwise, we wouldn't keep doing them. So the methodology, basically, we're going to get into that one of the future webinars. So I don't want to take too much of our time here today to go through that. But just understand that it basically is three. It's what I call a gating process. I first learned that process at Price Waterhouse by one of my mentors, a guy named Phil Andrews at Price Waterhouse. Now, the thing at Price is we were doing these big, expensive, game-changing type projects. They were multi-year projects. We were doing them for these big companies, and there was often a lot at stake. And so getting the reputation and having a process that allowed us to actually get this stuff done was really important. And so the idea of the gating process is that it kind of represents just that. It's a gate. You have to complete certain things. It's a milestone event. You have to create and complete a few things in order to pass through the gate. If you don't complete those things, you can't pass. I've implemented a form of a gating process in every company I've been with since Price Waterhouse. We did it at Flexalloy. I did it at 2 technology companies that I ran. I've done it with numerous clients. I've done it at Caliber Logistics, our third-party logistics company that we were at. And what it does is it really forces you to take big, multi-year, expensive, emotional type efforts, which is usually what your strategy is addressing, right? It's a long-term focus. It brings it down to earth. It brings it into a, what can I do in the next 90 days to move myself in that direction? Because the fact is, in today's business world, the market dynamics are so dynamic. They're so, they change all the time. Things within the company are changing. This idea of having these 3 to 5 year strategies is a little dated, and I like to think of it as more of, we've got a direction of where we want to head. We've got some targets defined. We understand what kind of capabilities we need to build over that 3 to 5 year period. We know where we want to be in the next year, but we have to get something done here in the next 90. What can we do in the next 90 days? So, for example, I know I have a customer concentration issue. I'm not going to solve that in 90 days. That might be something I try to solve over the next 3 to 5 years if I can. The question is, what can I do in the next 90 days to start moving the ball? And you start getting first downs, you get singles, and next thing you know is you're getting people around the bases. And so the idea of the gating process was to really divide this system into 3 major milestones: discover, prepare, and decide. In the discovery phase, you're understanding the value of what you have today, and maybe more importantly, the potential value if you make significant improvements to personal, financial, and business actions. And so today, what you want to do is you do want to get a valuation, but then you want to substantiate that value that you determined with a personal, financial, and business attractiveness and readiness assessment, so that you understand your strengths and weaknesses, and then you can move into the next stage where you can say, okay, I'm going to start moving the ball. I can take all these things I can do, and I can start identifying what are 3 to 5 of these things I can start getting done in the next 90 days and start moving yourself down the field. In the prepare stage, you're really moving on 2 concurrent paths: personal and financial planning, and then you're also moving on business improvements. So what we're doing here is we're addressing the 3 legs, not just business. That one is usually easy for us to focus on. But we're giving equal attention to our personal and financial planning as well. So this is the idea of developing what Peter Chrisman calls the master plan, which he wrote about in his book called The Master Plan, and making sure that we're addressing all 3 legs of the stool as we move through the prepare stage. And then when we get to the 3rd gate, which is decide, we bring exit planning into the present by asking ourselves every 90 days, not once in a while, or not when I have a bad day and I'm ready to leave, or I get that unsolicited phone call from someone that says they want to buy your business. But we start asking ourselves every 90 days, do I want to keep growing this thing, or do I want to exit? And like I said, we'll get into more of the details of that in another webinar, but in general, this is the process for value acceleration. So the idea was that it was created to provide a system and a scorecard to focus your organization on identifying, protecting, building, harvesting, and managing business value, while instilling a philosophy of incremental and continuous improvements. Above all, the value acceleration management process is grounded in action. It's all about action, creating action. When internalizing the way you run your business every day, instead of viewing it as a project, it generates actions which result in incremental, continuous improvements of value while integrating personal and financial planning with business planning. So it addresses all 3 legs. It's definitely not easy, but nothing in life is worthwhile if it's too easy, right? But if you adopt the frame of mind and internalize it throughout your organization, you will encourage behaviors and attitudes which generate actions which produce more income and sales, which I know you want, while at the same time creating a more valuable, transferable, and owner-independent business, which I know you also want. So we're going to get into one of the webinars is around value and income, one of my chapters in my book. I talk about the 5 stages of value maturity. My point there is that you don't have to choose. If you looked at the title of that chapter, it says value and versus is crossed out. It says value and income. I was at an owners forum a few years ago, and I was sitting on a panel with some owners, and I was talking about value should be your #1 goal, not income and sales. And one of the owners on the panel objected. He said, look, Chris, if I had a chance to make more money, generate more income, I'm going to focus on that. And I told him, I'm not suggesting we don't focus on that. We absolutely want to focus on that. What I'm suggesting is that if you focus on income and sales alone, you don't necessarily generate value. But if you focus on value, you will also generate income and sales. So by focusing on value first, you get both. You can do both. But just focusing on income and sales, you don't necessarily get both. So focus on value, because value will drive all of the other positive outcomes that you're looking for, including income and sales. So the focus on value as your #1 goal will also position you to have multiple exit opportunities and effectively make the time of your exit irrelevant. In other words, you're always ready. So in creating value acceleration, I look back at all my successful business experiences to see if I could find something that was in common with all those projects that I had done and all those companies I had worked either for or with. And the most successful of all experiences that I had was at a privately held middle market company called Flexalloy. And Brooke, I believe, asked you to download the chapter on the perfect exit. Andy Rayburn, who owned Flexalloy, really did have the perfect exit. Working at Flexalloy, or we called it Flex, as we called it, it really changed my life. Andy, who owned Flexalloy, Andy Rayburn, was a really unique individual. He was the kind of guy that made you feel like you could conquer the world. You know, no goal was unattainable. It didn't matter how down you felt or how challenged you felt before you went into his office. When you came out of his office, you felt like anything was possible. And he really did engineer the perfect exit. An incredibly high multiple, impeccable timing, and a solid plan for what he would do next. When Andy brought me in, and I was only one of two outsiders that he did bring in, he painted a vision, going back to Wallace D. Wattles, a mental image of a company that was 3 times its present size in 3 years. He knew Flex would need to change the way it needed to conduct business to achieve its vision, and to achieve that vision that fast. Andy was a man of action, and he backed up his commitment with money. He was willing to risk his personal wealth to achieve his vision. He truly believed in it. He was passionate about it, and he could articulate details of what it would look like. I can remember having numerous conversations about what Flex would look like and feel like at 3 times its size. And I remember talking to him about, what talent would we need to develop? What talent might we have to acquire to fill some holes? How would customer relationships change? What structural capital, people, process, technology, and facilities is the way I look at structural capital would need to be built to handle this rapid growth in volume? And what would be the tone and manner within the company? And what would be the experience with those doing business with us, both on the supply side and also on the customer side? For years after I left Flex, I spent untold hours thinking about what we did that made us so successful. And I applied these concepts in companies that I got involved with after Flex. My next company I joined was a technology company, and we tripled it in 3 years. And then I joined another technology company, and we doubled that one in 2. And that's when I realized I had a model that was producing results, predictable results, and I decided to start my own company. That was back in 2006. So let's take a look at what made Flex so special. First of all, a little bit about the company. It was a just-in-time fastener distributor to trucking and heavy equipment manufacturers. Nothing fancy. In fact, to give you guys an idea, some of you may be distributors or manufacturers, and you'll appreciate this. To get to my office, you'd come in the main, main area, the main office where Andy and accounting was, and you'd walk through the main office, out the back door, into the distribution and manufacturing facility. We had a manufacturing component at that time. And you'd walk through the plant, and you'd enter another door off the plant, and then you would follow the black trail that was, ground into the carpet back to the information technology department. And when you took a left and you walked in that door, you'd find, 6, 7, or 8, I don't really remember, IT people working in that back area, literally on card tables with, computers on top of the card tables and banging away at code, just as you might imagine it. And in fact, my office, my first desk there was also a card table because they didn't have any extra desks. And I got to admit, at the time I was just a couple of years from the good life at Price Waterhouse, and I can remember those first few weeks, a particular moment where I stood and I was looking out the window to the road and wondering to myself, what the hell did I get myself into here? You know, I had gone from everything being first class at Price Waterhouse into this back office off the factory floor with a card table as a desk. But little did I know that that was all going to really change. I was sold on Andy, and I was sold on his vision, and I was excited to be someone that could come in and help Andy achieve this vision. And he created that kind of inspiration inside of you. So we overlooked all of those other things, and I will say within about maybe 6 months to a year of being there, Andy acquired property south of where we were, out of the city. It had a couple of ponds. We put in a running trail. We put in a 50-yard football field for our flag football team, which was a national team. We actually won the National Flag Football Championship one year. They'd go out there on the football field and practice. We had a full court basketball court, and we had an absolutely lovely facility with rocks that played music, and some of the woodwork in the building was actually from the trees that had to be cut down. And people would walk up to Flex and they would be just astounded, like, this is a fastener company? This is amazing. And that and alone, changing that environment, it raised everybody's game, because there was a new sort of expectation set when we moved to that facility. So I wasn't in that small office back in the corner for too long. When I joined Flex, they were $93 million, and when I left, we were $265 million 3 years later. That equates to about 42% compound annual growth rate, and I think it's important for those of us that are in the business to understand that that was all organic growth. That was not done through acquisition. Sometimes you'll hear about companies growing at this pace, but a lot of times they've done it by acquiring other companies. This was all organic growth. As I said in my book, I can't really release, because it was a private sale, as to what actually made on it, Andy made on the deal. But I can tell you it was much more than $132 million. But if we just use some back of the napkin kind of calculations, at about $93 million, if you assume the value of the business at about 50% of sales, it's probably worth about $45 million when I joined. 3 years later, a fair estimate would be $132 million, which results in 193% growth in value, or $87 million. Not bad for somebody that was really thrust into being an owner at the age of only 24 years old. And some of you probably have sons or daughters that are 24 years old, and they're still pretty young at 24. Andy's father died at an early age, and Andy was thrust into running the company for his family. He did a fine job. So, like, what made Flex so special? It was a family business, obviously privately held, as I said. Our mission was to reduce the supply base, improve supply chain flow, improve quality, reduce waste, engineer better parts, improve on-time delivery, replace their systems with ours, and entangle ourselves in the customer's business so that we were as much a part of their supply chain as if they were doing it themselves. And oftentimes we had our own people in the facility, and you could tell what people were Flex employees versus what people might have been Freightliner employees. You couldn't tell. Now, this is a list that probably many of you, if you're a manufacturer distributor, already have, right? So all of us want to kind of do these things. What we did is we set a bogey out there of 3 times 90 million or 270 million, and then we began to develop these goals. And what we realized is that at the time the fastener industry was very fragmented. There were a lot of different small players in the market. It wasn't very technology rich, which is I think one of the reasons Andy wanted to bring me in. My position prior to that was in a technology group of roadway logistics. I was doing third-party logistics prior to that, and he knew he was going to need technology to be able to scale the business at the pace. He was pretty confident he could land the sales. He felt the economy was strong. Remember, this was back in 1997, and he knew that the biggest challenge was going to be, how could the organization absorb the change fast enough to enable us to be able to produce, at that level of sales. We knew that with so many different suppliers in the industry, we felt like we could, by taking on and reducing the supply base, we could force competition and force price reductions. We knew that with all these different suppliers in the marketplace that there were a tremendous amount of inefficiencies in the supply chain. We knew there were quality issues. We knew there was a lot of waste. I mean, think about fasteners, right? They're 5-10 cent parts. But at the same time, they were one of the top 5 items in a bill of materials in a trucking outfit, for example. And so the last thing you want to do is shut down an assembly line because you're missing a 5 or 10 cent part. So what do you normally do? You stock up. You stock up on all these parts, and you got to remember there's thousands of these things, tens of thousands of these parts. And you stock up on all these parts because you just don't want to run out, and you can't rely on your supply base, and you can't rely on your supply base's quality, so you ramp up the inventory. Some of these parts were being manufactured overseas, which also created an issue. And so you've got tons of capital actually tied up in these small parts. We saw that as a tremendous opportunity because what happens is you come out with a new line of trucks, or you update the model, and all those parts go obsolete, and there's no market for them because they've been engineered for your particular product, and so you end up just sending them maybe to a steel facility to recycle them, but you recover pennies on the dollar, if anything at all. And so there was this tremendous waste in the industry. We knew too that would require us to engineer better parts, that we could provide a competitive edge to our clients if we could also work with their engineering departments. So our 2 engineering groups worked very closely together, not just to respond to specifications, but to contribute to the design of the parts themselves. We knew that if we were going to implement a just-in-time manufacturing or distribution system, on-time delivery was critical, and if we could improve on-time delivery, we could cut the parts that are in the supply chain. Integrating our systems, not just in our own facilities, but integrating them with the clients, providing them technology that either they couldn't develop on their own or so they didn't have to, would be a real benefit to them and allow us to really get entangled into their businesses. So we really wanted to go well beyond just supplying parts, but we really wanted to get involved in our clients' businesses. Let's look at some of the things that we were doing there. One is, let's look first at the talent. So experienced, tenured teams were already there when I arrived. These were people that had been working for Andy for a number of years. He did know that he had to fill a couple of holes. One was on the technology side, which is where I came in. He liked my background because I was a technology guy that really understood supply chain. I didn't really come up through technology. I came up through supply chain and moved into technology because I actually knew how to make some of this IT stuff work. And then we had a very flat organization with only 6 directors. We'd meet with Andy once a week from 10 to 12 every Monday. We'd kind of have really more of a discussion about what was going on, and we might not see Andy the rest of the week. As such, because we were so empowered, Andy had really built an empowered team, and he was truly independent of the business, which allowed him to really focus on more important things. From a customer standpoint, our goal was very focused at 99.99% on-time delivery. I remember one time one of our factories was close to shutting down. We actually took a box of fasteners, rented a private jet, and flew it to Virginia in order to make sure that the parts got there. We were serious about meeting our on-time delivery efforts, and besides that, there was quite an expense because we were locked in. If we shut the factory down, we had to pay for that. The key to that was getting our customers to single source all fastener components to us. With that, we could get control of the supply chain, and we could get control of the supplier base, and we could then begin to establish some new standards that this supply base would have to meet. We wanted to dominate the supply chain all the way to the point of use. So when you're using it on the factory, everything back from there was controlled by Flexiway. We worked with the engineering department to engineer the components. We selected the suppliers that would supply the product. We managed the supply chain through our satellite facilities, and then our satellite facilities would restock the bins in the factories every 2 hours. And yes, we had, the technology that we created allowed us to really put in a pull system, which a lot of us have learned about, not a lot of us have seen in action, where the folks in the client's factory or customer's factory would scan those bins every 2 hours, and then that would send a pull signal through the entire system. And in order to do that, we really need to insert our technology into the entire supply chain. I remember the time I arrived, only about 10% of the suppliers were doing electronic transmissions, or EDI, which some of you know, or e-commerce. E-commerce wasn't even around then, but EDI. And one of our goals was to have 90% of our supply base doing EDI, within the next 2 years. I remember we held a supplier symposium where we basically told the supply base that this would be a component, a qualifier for doing any business with us in the future. And they were not too happy about it, as you can imagine, because they looked at the expense. But what we did is we said to them, look, we're not, we're elevating the industry here, and this is going to help everyone. And I actually, within my IT department, had a small consulting group that would go out to the suppliers and work with their people, their operating people, their supply chain, and their IT people to actually help them implement these systems. So we didn't just, edict and walk away. We actually, again, put our money where our mouth was and created a team that was available to suppliers to come in and actually help them achieve these goals. That, again, not just on the customer side, but we had true partnerships with our suppliers as well. At the end of the day, that helped them too. From a systems and processes standpoint, we were ISO certified. Our systems that we implemented were very scalable. We implemented an ERP system. We implemented a new warehouse management system, which was all handheld devices, smart systems. We implemented new accounting systems. Everything was implemented. Our slogan was flexibility, and the idea was we're going to elevate everybody's ability to perform through the use of systems. And Andy backed up this commitment with an investment of 2% of sales into technology annually. Now, that's a lot. That's a pretty big investment when you think about a $100 million company. But what that allowed me to do is I knew that as the sales were going to grow, that I would have additional money to invest. And Andy really didn't go any farther than that on the say, I'll give you the 2%, and then he allowed me the latitude to be able to manage that money as I needed to be able to manage it. So, and of course, we had to deliver. So heavy use of technology, and probably the most significant thing that all this resulted in was a culture unlike anything I've ever seen before or since, frankly. Obviously, a culture like this is very hard to achieve. It takes years to do it. The culture was already there when I arrived. We used to have basketball keys, which are called the paint, painted in each one of our facilities, and every month we would have a monthly in the paint meeting where everyone in the entire company would gather. And I remember this back in the late 90s, so we didn't have the internet really then. We had to do it over conference lines, but everyone would gather, I think it was on the first Friday, and we'd go around the country, and each of the facilities would talk about what was going on, visits, wins, recognize people. It was really a unique culture. Andy would get on those calls and kind of motivate and inspire everyone. We had something called the CARE Challenge. CARE stood for Customers Always Receive Excellence. And each department had a, sort of a nickname. My group at the time, to show you how old it was called the Hard Drivers. It's before the cloud and all the stuff we have today. And all of our systems were visual. So, the 99.9% goal was right heavy, on the, basically spelled out, huge sign on the wall as everyone entered the facility, so everyone could see it every day. We could see our year-to-date numbers. We could see what happened yesterday, last month. And we had a CARE challenge with a big board with all the nicknames, team nicknames attached to a horse. And as you completed your CARE challenge goals, which we had every quarter, your horse would move from left to right. That was a source of pride, and a little bit of healthy competition between the departments. And the other thing that, probably sounds a little strange, and like I wrote in my book, it probably might sound a little weird if it's not true, but it really was true, is we refer to all our employees as partners. We had a partner development group instead of human resources. We invested a lot in training and education of our partners and developing and fostering this culture that we wanted to have. I'm not giving you this, utopian type environment. We had our battles. You guys know what it's like, in a factory or distribution. You're going to have your battles from day to day, but I can tell you, overall, it's like a band of brothers. When times got tough, we really, at the end of the day, we understood what we were all there to do, and we were all committed to it. And we had a good, strong social capital, a good culture that would foster this kind of an environment. And yes, we did have a cheer. 1, 2, 3, flex was our cheer, and we would say it at the end of every End the Paint meeting. And people really, again, sounds a little corny, but people really got into it. There was a real sense of pride among all the employees about working for Flex-Alloy. And when you look back at these things and what we did, it's no wonder that we had the success that we did. We had great leadership. You had vision, inspiring vision, and a great culture backed by solid systems and processes, and it made everybody feel, very fortunate to be part of the company. Now, I'm going to wrap up with just a quick review of the 11 actions. You can read about these in Chapter 4 of my book, which is Changing Your Paradigm. And what we'll do for the remainder of the year is we'll go through each of these actions. Next month we're going to talk about shifting your paradigm, which I think is the very first thing you need to do, the very first action. We're going to talk about exit strategy is nothing more than really good business strategy. And if you take that point of view and you shift in that paradigm, I think that's the fundamental step that you've got to take to complete all the 11 actions. We're going to go through the 3 legs. We'll talk about why making value your number one goal is most important. We'll talk about bringing exit planning into the present. We'll talk about the 5 stages of value maturity. We'll talk about the 4 C's, which are really managing your intangible assets, which is where 80% of your value lies, and building transferability into your business. We'll get into, on the 7th action, we'll get into the details of value acceleration management system. We'll talk about how we relentlessly execute, measure, build our teams, not just inside, but also externally. And eventually, we'll talk about what investment is required for you to achieve your results. Your homework for the next action, this is obviously around action, so let's look at the first action I'd like you to consider, is to, between now and our next webinar, grade yourself on how well you currently integrate the 11 actions into how you run your business and your life today. Go back, look at those 11 actions, and give yourself a score. How well do you do it today? Maybe jot down a few of the questions, and kind of think about how well you're doing these and how well you've integrated this into your business today. I want to thank you all for attending, and hopefully if you're in one of those cities we're visiting in the next 90 days, I'd love to see you, and look forward to talking with you next month. I hope you'll all continue to walk with me and on this journey, and I'll see you all next month. Thank you.